All right, everybody, we are live. It is Jack Murphy. I am Jack Murphy. This is the Jack Murphy Live show. And today we have a incredibly special guest, Kash Patel. How are you doing, sir? Good to see you.
I'm doing awesome, Jack. Thanks so much for having me on.
Hey,
I'm really looking forward to
it is my absolute pleasure. Kash Patel, you have had an incredible journey over the last 10, 15 years. A basic introduction to the viewers here. Kash was a key Trump advisor in a number of important circumstances throughout the Trump administration, most specifically when it comes to the Russia collusion investigation and all kinds of things. And people got to know you from becoming a main star in the incredible documentary Plot Against the President. I've had Amanda on a number of times talking about her experiences. And so I'm excited here to talk to you, sir, but I want to go back a little bit because your personal experience, my friend, has been really insane. You are a son of immigrants, right? You went to college and law school. With all due respect, you didn't go to like the prestige universities, right? You didn't graduate from Harvard.
They wouldn't let me in.
Yeah, they wouldn't let you in. You didn't go to Harvard or Princeton. And your early job, what was your first job? What was your first job out of law school?
Probably the last job I thought I would ever do since I didn't even know it existed. I was a public defender for Miami-Dade County in Miami, Florida. And I went to law school to go be that guy, the guy in suits. I wanted to be that guy. I wanted to go make all this money and live in New York City and live the dream. And then I took a trial class my last year and got rejected by every corporate law firm I applied to. And I was like, this trial stuff's kind of fun. And a buddy of mine was like, why don't you try the PD's office? And I was like, I'm not going to be a cop. He's like, no, dummy, the public defender's office. And I'm like, I don't even know what that really is. What does that sound like? And he's like, well, you're going to make almost no money and you'll get to try cases. And I thought, okay. I mean, nobody else was hiring me anyway. So I gave it a go.
So your first job out of law school was a public defender, and you were in where? You were in Florida somewhere?
Yep, Miami, Florida.
Miami, Florida. And I did a bunch of research reading all of the nonsense that's been written about you. And on your Wikipedia page, dude, they say that you were a public defender in Florida, and then they listed like all of the crimes that you were the public defender for, as if
Yeah.
it was like some sort of smear on your character. It's hysterical. What kind of cases were you handling there?
It was a great run. I was a public defender there for 4 years for the county, and then I got an opportunity to be a federal public defender. So basically, the counterpart to a federal prosecutor for the Southern District of Florida, which is a totally different office. And so I did everything from murder to sex crimes to narco trafficking to fraud. I mean, Miami was a mortgage and Medicare fraud capital of the world.
Right.
To international arms stuff to national security cases, and it was ironic. I would come to learn I didn't really come out of law school like swinging in any political acts or anything. And I guess we can get to all that. But when I got to the public defender's office, they were like, oh, you're a Republican? And I'm like, yeah, what does that matter? And they're like, well, we're PDs, we're big due process people. And I was like, hang on a second. You guys have the monopoly on due process?
Right.
Like, do you also own the entire Constitution and then delve it out as you see fit?
Right.
And the biggest irony was like these huge gung ho liberals would see these cases, and sometimes we have to we have to defend terrible human beings who are accused of terrible acts.
Right.
But that's the job. And they would go in and cherry pick and say, well, I'm not going to do that because that's a case that involves a child, or that's a rape case, or that's a murder case. I don't want to do that. And I said, what's the point of being a public defender if you get to pick your cases? It was an interesting start to my career. But I just said, give me the worst of the worst. I'll try everything.
Yeah, that seems like that might be a theme for you throughout the rest of your career so far. But this you bring up a point that I wanted to drill down on. Right, you were a public defender, but then you got hired by a Department of Justice. Is that right? And so you got hired by a Department of Justice in what year?
2013, 14, maybe.
Yeah, 2014.
13, 14,
And who
something.
was the president then?
Barack Obama.
Barack
Yeah,
Obama. Okay, so
people forget that.
you were hired by the Barack Obama Department of Justice.
Yep.
And you get called a Trump loyalist as if that is a terrible thing. And yet you
Yeah,
were,
I didn't understand that.
yeah, yeah. Tell me about that.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off,
All right,
but
man, go for it.
it's funny. I spent more time in the national security apparatus under President Obama than I did under President Trump. And all the positions I held, this is another total misfire by the mainstream morons. I've never been a political appointee under Obama. I wasn't one under Trump at his White House. I'd never held a political appointment. They were national security roles that I felt were bipartisan. You know, for example, when I was in the DOJ at Obama, I was one of the lead prosecutors for Benghazi at Maine Justice, and I disagreed with the way a lot of that case and prosecution was handled, and I handled it professionally. I made it known. I wrote it down. I wrote memos, and I said, these are my opinions. And once the Attorney General gave the marching orders, then we executed. It's that simple. I didn't leak it to the media, and I didn't start making personal attacks against Obama or Holder or Lynch or whoever was in charge at the time. So I just think it's the height of hypocrisy when people tell me I'm a Trump loyalist. I don't really even know what that means, except to say I follow the chain of command, whether it was for Obama or Trump.
Right.
So I guess I'm an Obama loyalist.
Or you're a constitutionalist, or you respect due process, or you're a lawyer, or you're just like a generally reasonable guy that does follow the chain of command and wants to uphold the Constitution. How would you have described your politics at that time when you got hired by the Obama DOJ? Like MAGA wasn't quite a thing just yet then.
No, it wasn't even an idea. I mean, I was a moderate Republican. I think I always have been. I mean, it wasn't a surprise. I wasn't hiding that fact. And I got into the DOJ and they said, look, this is a place where your politics are not permitted to enter your work. And I said, great, that's no problem. I was doing it as a public defender and I've got no problem doing it at the highest level of national security cases. I agreed. I said, there shouldn't be politics involved. And, lo and behold, it was that administration's politicization of a couple of cases and also what we would come out their involvement in the Russiagate hoax that would define how politics interfered with national security matters.
Right, exactly. We're going to get to that for sure. But I wanted to really drill down on this because I feel like, as we said, you're unfairly slandered as some sort of loyalist, which the implication means that you're willing to break the law and like do things that aren't above board or unethical just to support the supreme leader. But no, you got involved in these issues as just like a Republican at the time. We didn't even have MAGA. Trump wasn't even a candidate. You got hired by the DOJ. No. You were then working with JSOC also. Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, dude, you went from being a public defender in Miami to like all of a sudden, boom, like quickly working with special operations, Department of Justice, secret missions.
Yeah, I mean, talk about best laid plans. Like, I didn't even know these jobs existed really, and then I end up going to have a job after job after job. The previous job I thought could not be beat, but it was by every subsequent role I had. And I just stayed in government for 16 years. At DOJ, I was running the World Cup bombings cases overseas in Africa. I was running prosecutions for ISIS across the U.S. and Europe. And then I got this opportunity to go to JSOC. And I was like, well, this sounds really awesome. What does it entail? And basically, I got to embed with our Tier 1 Special Forces guys and do global targeting operations against literally the worst human beings on planet Earth. And I thought to be a small piece of that apparatus, again, under President Obama, was an awesome opportunity that I just couldn't pass up, and I'd worked for it. Yeah. And so did my first civilian deployment in the military under Obama.
Fascinating. And when you say you were embedded with Tier 1 guys doing, apprehensions and targeting and stuff, like, is that local? Did you go abroad? Were you in the field? Like, tell us what you can about that.
Sure. So all of the above. Obviously, a lot of that work involves our clandestine operations, but everybody has heard of, SEAL Team 6 or Delta. That's out there enough where it's, without getting into the specifics, those are our best of the best in the Navy and the United States Army at what they do. And we have these things called high value targets, HVTs. around the world. And basically, you take the intelligence that the US government collects and you put it against these target sets to see, do we have enough derogatory information to say this guy's a bad guy, he's a really bad guy? What are our options? Do we want to issue a kinetic strike option? Do we want to do a raid? Can we do a prosecution? Can we go capture him and bring him back to the US for prosecution? Or can we hand him over to authorities we trust, like our allies, some of our allies around the world? And so those are the types of decisions we were making sort of at the headquarters component, and then you would go downrange to execute on one or two or more of them at a time. It just sort of varied with whatever came up.
Was there an inclination or a bias within that organization to choose one of those options that you just laid out, like, extradite and a capture and bring back to the US for trial, eliminate, like, was there a bias?
I think it just varied with the targets, right? Like some of the targets were in areas that we're just not going to go into, right? So we weren't going to send in a man squad. It was too high risk. Other times, the preference was capture because we could collect valuable intelligence against the rest of the network, right? And that was the ideal situation. But also, those types of situations are high risk for American soldiers and Americans supporting our warfighter downrange. So it's a delicate balance. And, ideally, I think you'd want to capture all these people and prosecute them and put them in prison for life or subject them to the death penalty under the law. But the reality was certain folks we just couldn't get to do that.
Right. Interesting. Okay, so you're working with JSOC. You're doing this incredible work. Sounds fascinating. Sounds exciting. It's like holy crap! Like you went to law school and you're a public defender. Now you're like working with the tier 1 guys, like tracking down the baddest guys in the world and deciding what to do with them. That's incredible. I mean, it sounds exciting as hell, and it sounds like American dream kind of stuff, really. And that's sort of the general theme that I'm getting here is like, your parents come to the United States, they work hard, you work hard, you go through, again, sort of the middle ground of academia, not being launched by some prestigious organization. This is no slight, man. This is saying like awesome,
no, I get
right?
it. Yeah.
And then here you are now, just like on this incredible trajectory. And so let's keep going on that trajectory. At what point did you become aware of Trump, the candidate? Did you become aware of potentially getting involved in the Trump administration? Did you work on the campaign? Like, how did you first get involved in the upswing that took you, closer and closer to the White House and eventually put forth to some pretty, no offense, dude, but put forth for some pretty crazy appointments. So like, how do you get there?
Yeah, best laid plans, right? So I found out, that Trump was running when the world found out he was running when he came down the escalator. And at that time, I didn't give it much thought. I was still in the National Security Division at the Department of Justice, and we had the most strict rules regarding your ethical obligations and your political crossovers. So I stayed apolitical. I just said, I'm still a terrorism prosecutor. I was still doing work with DOD. I never worked on a political campaign. I didn't work for Trump. I didn't donate any money to Trump or any other Republican candidate. I didn't work on any of the other campaigns. And the same on the Democratic side. I never worked on their campaigns, donated money. I said, I'm in this role. It's a privilege to be in this role, and I take the oaths that I signed seriously. And so I never got in the political sphere during the whole campaign 15, 16 run-up. I just kept working. The campaign, I just, like everybody else, I just watched it on TV and I was like, wow, this might be one of the craziest campaign cycles in modern history. And it was.
Yeah, indeed. So then how did you, so what was between JSOC and like working for Devin Nunes, for example? And how did you get that?
Sure.
Position?
So I went back to DOJ, being on loan. So in the beginning part of the Trump administration, I was still at DOJ for a few months when Attorney General Sessions came on board. And then around, if we rewind before that, I was trying to, once President Trump got elected, I wanted to get a job in his administration doing national security work. So I said, okay, I don't even know how to do that, but okay, let's figure that out. And so I actually was trying to get a buddy of mine a job, and a mutual friend of mine from my time at JSOC introduced me to Devin, and he said, "Hey, Devin, pretty well connected." And I had no idea who Devin Nunes was. I was like as far removed from the hill as you could possibly be. And so I'm like, sure, I'll call. So we talked. Devin and I talked. I said, "Hey, could you help my friend? He's looking for this posting." And he's like, "Yeah, absolutely, no problem. Nice to meet you." And we were talking in his office, and it's him and one of his senior guys, and they're like, "Hey, have you been following this? This is like late winter of 16, so the election had occurred, and President Trump was elected. And they're like, you've been following some of this Russiagate stuff, and it was just starting to come out." And I was like, "Not really. Sounds, stupid." And I have busier targets on my desk that I was trying to prosecute. And so they were like, "Well, we need someone with your background who is a PD, a federal prosecutor, intel background with JSOC to help us run this Russiagate investigation." And I was like, it sounds extremely boring. I don't want to A, go to the Hill, and B, do that. um, so again, with like best laid plans, Devin's a tremendous guy, and he was like, I told him, I said, hey, sir, I'd really like to just work in the Trump administration at some point. He's like, "Okay, let's keep in touch." So we're in November, December, the Flynn stuff starts blowing up. And then, Flynn gets named National Security Advisor. And then shortly thereafter, that just crumbles. So my trying to get on the NSC under Flynn sort of just dissipated. And at that time, the Steele dossier memo had leaked. And so now the media was just going ballistic with Trump and his associates being in bed with the Russians. And Devin and I kept talking. He said, "Look, I can help you down the road with the Russiagate, with getting a national security post in the Trump administration." He said he'd do his best, no promises, but I really need someone to handle this investigation. And I said, "Look, that's a fair deal. I wanted to leave DOJ because of a total lack of accountability internally at DOJ. We can get into that if you want, but it just really pissed me off." And so I said, "Listen, we just have to come to one simple agreement. If I come to the Hill, I'll obviously be finally a political guy, and I want accountability. I want oversight to mean something, and I want everybody to read what we find. I don't want to tell them what we found. I want to show them." And he was like, "Deal, no problem. I totally agree with that." And so like March, April, I was on House Intel running an investigation that Devin and I thought almost no one would pay attention to, but we were totally freaking wrong.
So at that time, you and Devin both, you begin this investigation, and you seriously think that no one's going to care?
Well, I guess probably I could have phrased that better. I thought a small portion of America would care. None of us saw it unfolding in the fashion that it did, to the extreme heights and corruption that it did, right? We did think we would dig in and find some malfeasance, but malfeasance is putting it lightly. 17 people got fired. People lied to a federal court, and a presidential campaign was spied on based on funding from their opposition on made-up intelligence. I mean, you can't. If I wrote a book like that 6 years ago, no one would buy it.
Right. It was too crazy. So, okay. So you guys just didn't understand the depth of where things were going to go, how bad it really was, how severe it was. Maybe
Yeah.
like how much the other side would keep pushing, right? And not back down. So what was that like? At what point during that investigation did you begin to really understand what had happened? I mean, was there a moment where you're like, "Oh man, this is it. This is what we're been looking for here"?
Yeah, I think so. The media went just bananas, like totally nuts. I mean, they were starting to do that during the campaign cycle. And once the president got elected, they just lost it. And they continued to lose it over this investigation. So that on one track, and on a parallel track, we're starting to dig into the intelligence. And they finally let me read the FISA, the federal application to surveil an American citizen with our most sensitive techniques, which I used, just for an example, I use FISAs all the time against terrorists. That's how we catch them. That's how we get intel. It's a great tool, and it's on the books for a reason. It needs to be protected. But I finally read that in the spring of 17, and at the time, we weren't allowed to tell anyone anything. And as you now know, we were able to get all this stuff declassified. The Steele dossier made up like the entire subject portion of the FISA for its justification. And I said, this is crazy. This is basically gumshoe detective work that went as bad as it could go. And we presented it to a federal judge to say, we want to surveil an American citizen and those folks that he's talking to. I just said, Devin, that something's not right. Like, this would never have gotten signed off by any prosecutors I know at the Department of Justice.
Yeah. Again, back to this smear of you being a Trump loyalist. Guys, listen to what we're saying here. This guy, public defender, lawyer, and then prosecutes terrorists, utilizes FISA, is an expert in these systems and these processes. Oh, it's almost as if, Kash, you were qualified for the job that you were given. In fact, you sound like somebody who was uniquely qualified for that position, a non-political hire, actually an Obama DOJ hire, someone intimately familiar with all of the FISA requirements and the secret courts and the whole thing. And here you are doing an investigation. So it doesn't sound like you were put in the wrong place to me. Now, the Carter Page memo, this 4-page thing that you produced, there was like real ramifications and consequences from that. What happened once you put out the memo on the FISA stuff?
Wow, the Nunes memo. Devin and I circled back to the thing we started with, was accountability. And we have to show the American people what we're finding. And we were getting to that point where we were running into opposition from Trump's own appointees at DOJ and FBI and CIA. They did not want us to release any of this information. And I said, look, guys, I've prosecuted some of the most sensitive terrorism cases in the world based on some of the most sensitive intelligence we have. There are ways to follow the law and release some of it. I'm not saying everything's got to go out, but there's a good chunk that needs to. And this is an extraordinary circumstance. And we fought them, and they just kept fighting us. And we said, okay, if you won't do it, we will use our authorities at Congress, granted to us by the law, to do it ourselves. And that was sort of the genesis of the Nunes memo, and ultimately became declassified by the White House themselves instead of Congress having to do it, because they just found so much merit in it. And we also, we told Adam Schiff, that, hillbilly clown from the other side, that we were just going to release a memo, and you could put out whatever you wanted, but that was part of my plan. I wanted to bait him into putting out twice as much as we put it out. Of course, we wouldn't tell him that. He would just think, that guy's so full of himself. I've been living rent-free in his mind for the last 4 years. But, we just said, yeah, go ahead. We'll vote it out of office, out of the committee ourselves, which is what we did. And that information was almost more valuable than what Devin and I and the Republicans put out, because it allowed the American public, not right then and there, because if you remember, it was like dueling memo battle, which was the silliest thing I've ever heard. But the media just said, everything Schiff said is right, and everything Nunes says is wrong. Right. Now, if you fast forward, we were validated by the independent Inspector General from the Department of Justice, who I don't even think was a Trump appointee, by the way, and then excoriated everything the Dems had tried to put out, and said, and it allowed us to show the misinformation that the Dems were actually putting out with the help of the media themselves. And point by point, thanks to folks like you, it got out there. But of course, the other side just ignored it and said, okay, whatever. If it's not Russia, it's Ukraine, or if it's not Ukraine, it's, whatever the next iterative is of that insanity.
White supremacy.
Yeah.
That's the
right. No, I'm the white supremacist.
Yeah.
It's me.
Yeah. I mean, you look like a card-carrying member, my friend. Well, they say Asians, they're white adjacent. So here we are. Gosh. Okay. So just one more time for the people in the back. During the committee hearings, the investigation, did anyone go on record and say they had any evidence of actual Russian collusion? Did anyone testify?
Not one person.
Say that one more time.
Not one person. I mean, we based our questioning of our 70 some witnesses under oath, and this included attorneys generals, heads of the FBI, the CIA, private citizens, Fusion GPS, Perkins Coie, the DNC lawyers, the whole cast of characters. And we said, hey, if there's evidence, then you guys can tell us so we can go find it. Because I told Devin, if we find that there was some bad conduct at the Trump campaign, we got to tell the American people. It doesn't matter. That doesn't, even though, he's the Republican president, that's irrelevant for this investigation. And we asked every single person, do you have any information or evidence of collusion, coordination, or conspiracy with the Trump campaign and any member of the Russian government to swing the 2016 election? And everybody under oath said no.
Everybody under oath said no, ladies and gentlemen. No, 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 no. Yet it doesn't matter, does it? It doesn't matter.
And now you know why it took us 3+ years to get those deposition transcripts out to the American people. It wouldn't go out until Rick Grinnell and I were running DNI that we were finally able to get those declassed. We wanted those out immediately so you guys could know that. So you could know Sally Yates and Loretta Lynch and Comey and Brennan and Clapper and the DNC lawyers and Fusion GPS. None of them had actual evidence of it. And the CrowdStrike guys. We wanted it out immediately, but now you know why it didn't get out.
Right. Because it vindicated, exonerated, and basically, said to the world, look, this whole Russia thing is complete crock. And the people who were pushing it, the names you just listed, who in the media say that it happened all the time. They'll give reports and interviews and say that there was Russian collusion. No doubt in my mind. But behind closed doors, under oath, testifying, when their ass was truly on the line, they gave the truth. They gave the truth.
It was the one place.
It was the one place, right? 'Cause before God, and also don't want to go to prison.
Right.
And so they finally didn't lie in that circumstance. And so, do you feel like the American people are as aware of that fact as they should be at this point in time?
I think a lot of the American people are, again, thanks to guys like you. But I think, unfortunately, the tragedy of all this is most of the American people who normally would have taken the time to read about this refuse to do it.
Right.
Because they're so biased against actual fact finding and the fact that the mainstream media has filled their heads with Adam Schiff and his band of lunatics for so long, to include the likes of Swalwell. I mean, look at the cast of characters that you're saying you're relying on to be credible, to tell you, the American people, what the Russiagate hoax actually was. These guys have been proven wrong time and again, not to mention the fact that they were leaking information. The Dems, were leaking information during our interviews and misfiring on purpose with that information to create headline news that they knew their friends would just run with. The ideal example is the Don Jr. interview, and that's a whole nother topic. But what they did to him was outrageous. I mean, literally, we're in there for 9 hours, and they're giving play-by-play commentary to the media outside. And they got the major dates wrong of the whole, Trump Tower meeting, which was not really an issue because the facts didn't support it, but that didn't stop them.
It's it never ceases to trouble me still. I haven't gotten as black-hearted or black-pilled as I need to be, basically, but just, it just doesn't end, the duplicitousness and the lying and the cheating and the leaking and then telling the truth in secret, but then walking out the door and literally lying to the American people like 5 minutes after they testified. It makes you think it happens all over the place in every part of the government, and people are lying and cheating all over. It just feels like lately it's really been heavy coming on the other side because of this witch hunt and all this desperate desire to destroy Donald Trump.
That's it.
Facts.
That's
truth,
what it was.
Laws be damned. None of those matter. What do you think now here in May of 2021? And I know we've all talked about this a million times, but has your position changed at all? What is the specific motivation, you think, for them to try to destroy Trump? Is it hiding their crimes? Is it keeping the globalist, neoliberal regime in place? Like, What have you updated your sense on that at all? Like a few months after the end here.
I don't know what specifically to pinpoint it on, except the fact that they never accepted his win in 2016 in the first place. And fast forward 4 or 5 years, and they're the ones talking about election integrity and election security matters as if they really cared. To use that other than a meaningless headline apparatus to ensure their candidate won. I mean, if you remember, in 2016, President Trump said, yeah, I don't know if I'll certify the election on November 8th. I may want to look into what happened to it. And Hillary Clinton came out on stage and excoriated him and said, of course I'm going to accept it. I'm going to accept it right away. I mean, again, the height of hypocrisy, the day after the election, the only one not accepting the election was Hillary Clinton and her campaign, and said, we were going to contest the results of this election. And they did, if you recall. And so if President Trump chose to, and he did, contest the results of the last election, the same principle standard in the media wasn't applied as to he has a right to do that. Whether it's wrong or right in terms of the underlying fact pattern, he was a candidate. Their candidate contested the prior one. Why can't he contest this one?
Yeah, the hypocrisy abounds. And it makes me wonder, and this is totally speculation, this is not fact-based, I'm just talking out of my ass here. It makes me wonder, if you remember when Hillary during the election, she had that one interview where she was like, why aren't we up by more in the polls? I can't believe it. Why aren't we winning by more? She was just like totally flabbergasted. Now, I imagine that there's her ego was involved there.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it almost felt like she just felt really damn sure that she was going to win. Like there's no question I'm going to win. So what is this? I don't understand. Why was she so confident? Total speculation. Talking out of my ass here. Who knows?
I mean, look, it's not that. I mean, you want to talk about someone who is literally measuring the drapes in the Oval. It was her. Right. Nobody thought Hillary Clinton was going to lose that campaign on the Democratic platform. And quite frankly, most of Americans probably didn't think that too. And that goes to show you the power of, the democratic process. When you have a candidate who is crushed by the mainstream media and who has to work 10 times as hard to get his voice to the American public and then wins, shows you, how righteous our system is. And so, yeah, I don't know what made her think she was the anointed one. Internally, I said, I don't see that unfolding, but maybe we should actually just go ahead and have this election anyway, so maybe we can, have the American people choose instead of you picking a cabinet officials before the American people have ever even pulled the lever. And I think that is what probably ticked them off even more, because they thought they had 16 years of reign, Obama, and then 8 more with Hillary, and they were going to solidify their platform. And I don't think they've gotten over it. I mean, they were pissed. And then when the President Trump ran it for 4 years, they got twice as pissed. And that's when the deep state guys kept coming out with agendas to thwart the commander in chief, which I just thought was reprehensible. And I said, look, if I have an order, I work for the president. I don't know who you guys think you work for, but I work for him. And then most all you work for me. So we're going to do what he says. And if you don't like it, you can go put postage stamps on delivery routes for all I care.
It's funny, man. You mentioned the word deep state again. And, it really is. It is a name that we've come to use for like the entrenched bureaucracy. And another term for that would be like institutions, right? And I remember when I was at Georgetown School of Foreign Service, and we were studying the neoliberal consensus and like how do you bring free markets and democracy to emerging markets around the world and stuff like that. And one of the key things that they always talked about was institutions. You can't have democracy without institutions, because in their minds, if you have weak institutions, you get strong leaders, and the strong leaders are antithetical to the democratic process. it just, as I'm getting older now and I just put all these things together and all these ideas, I'm beginning to see that, okay, yeah, they were talking about establishing a deep state in these emerging, markets and these fledgling democracies so that they could control the democratically elected leaders, and put the check on the power of the people, which is exactly what has gone on here inside the United States as well. And it was funny, just one last bit on that. Like, I went to George Mason for economics, so I studied libertarianism. Then I went to Georgetown for, international affairs, and I learned about the neoliberal consensus. And they actually had pitched them as being opposites. That the Georgetown globalist way was like the democratic way, and like, libertarianism was very Republican. But then I figured it out later, man. They were exact the same thing. Exactly the same thing. Neoliberalism, libertarian market based economics, institution building, democracy spreading. It's all the same thing. And it's all the same thing. And we see exactly here with you, this idea of institutional check or deep state. I guess it just depends on your perspective. If they're the deep state or if they're the established, mature bureaucracy that democracy depends on. What is your opinion now, sir, of institutions, bureaucracy, the established bureaucratic class in DC? What is your opinion? And had it changed since you'd gotten into government?
I think the overwhelming majority of folks that sign up to serve end up doing just that. They serve. They serve multiple administrations, multiple jobs they serve in with whose political leadership they disagree, but they do the job. And I think a certain few select individuals have ruined it, ruined the reputation of places like DOJ and the FBI and the intelligence community and even now the DOD, with terrible, terrible conduct. I mean, conduct that would have sent you and me to prison by now already, and for intentionally lying to a federal court to obtain a warrant on an American citizen who, oh, by the way, happened to be a member of a presidential campaign. I mean, I don't know what it takes to have a real accountability, but I don't see how this Department of Justice can restore the sort of integrity that they say that they wield along with its FBI if they won't hold people accountable for lying to a federal court, for allowing, intentionally permitting a few bad actors to goose this information through a system that is so airtight that 99.9% of the time it gets it right. And the 0.1% of the time it gets it wrong is because you have the likes of James Comey, Andy McCabe, Strzok, Lisa Page, and their crew running things at the FBI and sidling up to DOJ to grease a federal warrant through the system that would never have been approved. I understand America's frustration with it. And to your question about, this deep state versus whether it's gotten worse or better or not, I think some of those actors are still in place, unfortunately, and people will think they can do this sort of conduct and get away with it because they truly believe they were protecting America from Trump, even though they weren't, and they were upholding the rule of law, even though they were shattering it. And that was part of the reprehensible lack of internal accountability at the DOJ and FBI that caused me to leave. And it wasn't everyone, again, it was just certain few individuals thinking they knew better. And once Trump got elected, and I was at the department when he got elected, man, that place almost imploded at certain levels. And it was shocking to see because I said, I've been doing my job for the last however many years under Obama, and I was going to do it under Clinton too. Like,
right.
It's what I signed up to do. It wasn't going to change.
Right.
What gives you guys the right to make it different because your leader wasn't chosen?
Right. Right. Man. Intense. What a crazy story. So after the Russia state stuff, after the Nunes and that committee, where did you go from there? And how did you get there? Because I think you start to accelerate a little bit after this.
No, Devin, true to his word, helped me get over the NSC. And shortly thereafter, I was running counterterrorism for the White House, which was the job I had ultimately wanted. My background was in counterterrorism, and I built up a portfolio in operations and policy and civilian military roles in that arena. And then I had just come off a tenure at House Intel where, we actually did other work, surprise, surprise to other people, but
Shocker.
we oversaw the intelligence apparatus, which is a massive, massive organization. So I continued to learn a ton about how the various agencies and departments operate within government. And then I finally made it to the NSC and got the role that I was fighting to get, which was, hey, I think I can run counterterrorism for President Trump, and that was awesome. That was
Who
really
hired
really
you? Do you have an interview with the big man with that, or how does that work?
no, at the time I came in, the president and this, now you have to remember, I still have not met President Trump when I got to the NSC. I still not had a conversation with President Trump. We hadn't exchanged messages or letters. But President Trump had begun to know about me because of the good graces of like the Devin Nuneses, the Jim Jordans, the John Ratcliffes, the Lee Zeldins of the world would tell him, we were in that foxhole together on the Hill battling the Russiagate thing. And when we got vindication, they were kind enough to relay to the president my small role in that. So I think he had become aware of me. And Devin, true to his word, wanted me to get that counterterrorism role. So the first way in was under Bolton, and the president, basically wanted me on his National Security Council. So that's how I immediately got in.
Interesting. Working for John Bolton on the National Security Council, heading up counterterrorism. It's impressive, bro. Very impressive.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's a little bit of a story there. That guy doesn't exactly love me.
Yeah. What's the story?
So Bolton didn't want to hire me, flat out. And actually, when Devin brought it back to the president's attention that I still wasn't at the National Security Council, that wasn't received lightly. He thought I was already there. And then I was extended an offer at a level and a position that was much different than the one I was going at, because they thought I would turn it down. And I said, no, absolutely not. It's the White House, it's the National Security Council. I'm going to go do whatever you tell me to go do. And then I'm going to bust my ass and get the job I want, which is what I did. And then obviously we got rid of Bolton. So it tells you all you need to know about that guy.
Right, exactly. I did remember getting some reports from people on inside when Bolton came in that the efficiency increased. At least Bolton knew how to push memos and paper and run the bureaucracy. But people certainly weren't very happy with the policy prescriptions or the recommendations or even the way in which he went about it. Interesting. Very interesting. Okay, so you're now at the NSC. You're working on counterterrorism, and we have like 17 minutes left, and I have like two other big questions that I definitely want to get to, but I am curious about this in particular. With your experience with counterterrorism and understanding how we go around the world, tracking people down, how we're occupying force in Afghanistan and Iraq, and all of our troops and forces there are geared towards counterterrorism, and to what extent should the American people be afraid that this American empire, which has basically been training itself on counterterrorism, buying all the counterterrorism toys, training people with 20 years worth of counterterrorism experience, how worried should we be that apparatus is going to be turned on us here in the United States? Because we now know that President Joe Biden said at a joint session of Congress that white supremacy is terrorism, and it is the number one terrorist threat that we face. All the same 17 intelligence agencies that said Russia collusion was a thing all say the same thing about white supremacy being the biggest terrorist threat that we face. To what extent, A, is that true? And B, to what extent should the American people be afraid that the whole apparatus is going to be turned on white supremacists, and we know what that means, here in the United States?
Yeah, no, two great questions. So for months now, I've been demanding, at least on the media that I would do, to talk about national defense and national security of this administration. And because we've been asking, what is their policy? What are you doing against Iran and Russia and China? What are you doing to prosecute targets in the Middle East and work with our allies in some not so nice places? What is your policy? And the policy was, well, what did Trump do? We're going to do the opposite. And that's not a policy. That's how you get a country in danger. And that's not what the American people deserve from our leadership. And all it is a politicization of the defense of this country, our intelligence apparatus, and our military. That's what he's doing by saying, oh, white supremacy is a greater threat than Al Qaeda, than ISIS. White supremacy is a greater threat than what China is doing to us right now on the intellectual property side. White supremacy is a greater threat than what Russia is doing to us on a counterintelligence platform. That is the definition of moronic. And all it does is it politicizes, and it allows the mainstream media to gobble it up and feed it back out to the 51% of the Americans that want to see it. And if you ask, to the second part of your question, it's a nice segue, if you ask the people that serve, the people that I served with that continue to serve, they know white supremacy is not the number one national defense issue for the United States of America. These guys aren't going to fall asleep on the wall. They're not going to turn the switches off in Afghanistan without safeguarding our interests. They're not going to leave Iraq and Syria and Somalia because we've been told at home white supremacy is what you should be watching out for downrange. And so that, having worked with those men and women, they're not going to stop. So they will take their marching orders like good folks do in service, but they're not going to stop with the service of protecting this nation. And that gives me great comfort. What pisses me off is the politicization of it at the top. And I've talked to so many people who are still in, and they say, look, we understand that's what they're saying. We're doing our job down here, what we signed up to do. And if there's a white supremacy target that becomes a reality, you bet we're going to tell people about them that need to know. But if terrorism's a bigger threat, yeah, we're going to do that. And hey, how about bringing home some more hostages? We're going to do that. And we need to still kick Iran continuously into submission, because they're not just going to hand over their nuclear arsenal to us or give us back our hostages. It's never going to happen when the Ayatollah is still in charge. You do make progress on it when you kill Qasem Soleimani. But I don't think we'll see any more of that type of action under this administration.
No, definitely not. In your experience as a top counterterrorism official, the National Security Council, do you have any evidence to support the notion that white supremacy is the top terrorist threat facing our country?
No, zero.
Do you believe that the administration today, the Biden administration today, putting this notion at the top of the national agenda is a risk to national security and the security of the citizens of the United States of America?
Yes, because it is an administration that is serving the interest of the media. The media wants him to say things such as white supremacy is the number one national security problem with America, because the media will then take it and run with it. And then morons in professional sports will tweet about it and put it up on Facebook and say, okay, everyone that worked for President Trump is a racist. And we're still looking for the white supremacist who is running president's national security infrastructure. And that is a threat. That is an intentional threat that should be batted away by a Republican or Democratic administration. 100%, unless and until the intelligence actually supports it. And this is a continuation of the narrative that they wanted to run from January 6th onward, which has continued to be debunked in terms of white supremacists driving this activity that they now keep calling this insurrection that actually did not lead directly to the deaths of the people that they say died. Yeah. But it's so many months beyond it that they've allowed their narrative to be written, and it's been trumpeted by everyone who wants to take a knee when our national anthem is sung, and everyone who wants more attention because they think they have a position of power in sports, yet they've actually never really done anything to unify this country. All they've done is divide it.
Right, exactly. Okay, guys, just facts. We had Julie Kelly on just the other day, and we went through all of the charges, everything around January 6th, and we realized, of course, there was no weapons brought by any of the protesters, None of the protesters killed anybody whatsoever. And the only person that died was a protester shot by a Capitol police officer. These are the facts. However, the narrative has been put into people's minds. It got there first. It is the worst attack on democracy since the Civil War, an armed insurrection led by the president, encouraging them to leave his speech on the Mall on January 6th and go ransack the Capitol. All lies. First of all, I was at that speech on January 6th, and it was boring. And it didn't motivate anybody to get up and do anything but yawn, to be totally honest. No one stood up and ripped off their shirt and went storming down the mall to the Capitol after that. Definitely not. So, and then here we are talking to you, sir, the top counter-terrorist advisor to the president on the National Security Council, as late as 2020, telling us unequivocally that there is no evidence to support the notion that white supremacy is the leading terrorist threat or the leading threat facing the United States. Guys, you hear that? This is the sound of truth coming from people telling the truth, who've done the research, who believe in the truth. Kash here, hired by Obama. Hired by Obama in the DOJ, wasn't even on the Trump campaign, wasn't even a MAGA guy, just doing his duty as called to service and really getting a lot of grief for it. So I appreciate your service, Kash. Thank you. And your tireless search for the truth. Thank you very much for that. And for putting up with all of these guys trying to stab you in the back, stab you in the face, slander you, defame you, tell people you're the worst thing that ever happened. I mean, I understand that there's a number of lawsuits happening right now for defamation. I hope that you guys get into discovery on that. That should be a lot of fun. Should be a lot of fun there. We only have a few more minutes, so I want to ask you just a couple more questions. One, let me ask this one first. Why were you appointed to the Department of Defense Chief of Staff for I think it was the acting secretary or the secretary at the time? What were your marching orders at that time? Because I'll tell you, a lot of people raised eyebrows at that. The timing was suspicious, I would say, for people, at least enough to ask questions. And I asked questions at the time. I asked some of our mutuals behind the scenes, and they told me very specifically Kash was sent there to uphold the agenda of the President of the United States, which was a very good answer. But why don't you tell me, sir, what were your marching orders? Why were you appointed Chief of Staff at the DOD so late in the administration? What was the plan?
Sure. I mean, I think it was, having come out, we never talked about, I ended up being Rick Grinnell's number 2 at DNI. So I built up this pretty big background actually running the intelligence community, which is a huge apparatus. It's not as big as DOD. Nothing is. Prepared me to run the world's largest organization. So one, I had a proficiency in running the interagency, in leading awesome men and women in our national security apparatus, budgeting cycles, oversight at Congress, having done prosecutions, having done investigatory work, and also been entrusted with traveling with the president to be his advisor for the nuclear football. I mean, so I had worked in all these fields as a national security professional. And I think one of the things that frustrated the president the most was he campaigned on ending wars and bringing home hostages and killing terrorists. I mean, all 3 things were in my wheelhouse. And so when he sent Secretary Miller over there, Secretary Miller and I had served together in many posts in the past. We'd served in the White House together running counterterrorism, known each other for a long time. And when they asked me to be Chief of Staff for the Department of Defense, this is what the Commander-in-Chief, or I should say, actually, this is what the Secretary of Defense wants, and the Commander-in-Chief will agree with it if it's the recommendation of his new SecDef. And I said, well, if that's the ask, then, roger up. That's what you go do to serve. And so the marching orders were simple. End the wars. Stop Iraq, stop Somalia, stop Afghanistan, stop Syria. And bring home hostages, take care of our vets, increase care for our veterans. And also, at the time, it was Warp Speed. Operation Warp Speed was, I don't want to say there's a 1, 2, 3 rank in these priorities, but they were pretty much all ones. And so we did. Secretary flew 65,000 miles in in the 3 months we were on the job to talk to our men and women around the world in the theaters of war we were ending, because we wanted to hear from them. Is this the right decision? Is this the right move? And unequivocally, everywhere we went, even to my surprise, we were in Afghanistan, we were in the Middle East, we were in Southeast Asia, we were near Iraq and Syria. Everybody and all the leadership said, we need to leave these places. We have been here too long. And so we did. So we put in play a proposal, and we went down to 0 in Somalia. We totally decreased our footprint in Iraq, in the Iraq-Syria scenario, and in Syria even more so. And we were supposed to be at 0 on 1 May of this year. We would have hit that mark had Biden not set September 11th as this new, trial balloon. And to, talk about a guy, a New Yorker, to use September 11th for anything other than honoring the fallen and the men and women that served is outrageous. But of course, the mainstream media celebrated that act because it was him who was going to end Afghanistan, when in fact it was President Trump who ended Afghanistan. So marching orders were simple. And, internally, some folks at the Department of Defense didn't like it. But I was lucky and fortunate enough to say, well, the commander-in-chief has issued a directive. I work for him and you work for me. So we're going to go do it.
Impressive. And I appreciate that. And you guys had some success doing what you could do until people come in and turn the successes around. Strokes of pen, change in policy, different orders. These things can all be undone very quickly. In just the last couple minutes here, one, I have to throw this out here. And your name was put up for director of the CIA. Is that right?
I think, some conversations are best left for another day.
Okay. Well, I did read some reports about that, conversations that were had about potentially you landing as the director or an acting director of the CIA. That would have been a pretty impressive punctuation mark on what is truly an incredible arc. I mean, what is more American than this, right? Like working hard, getting a good job, grinding away, being a public defender, upholding due process like the great patriot John Adams. How far have we fallen where John Adams defends the British in the Boston Massacre, gets them acquitted, okay? And now today, if you donate $25 to a legal defense fund for a 17-year-old, you get fired from your law enforcement position. The world has gone crazy. And in this crazy world, dude, you have really carved a path that's very impressive and inspiring. And I hope that everybody who's paying attention or who's listening is paying attention. This is what happens when you work hard, you stay true to your principles and your morals, and you just keep putting one successful foot in front of the other, and you go for it, man. You end up like Kash, having an enormous impact on politics, history, war, life and death. I mean, man, that's heavy stuff, involved in decision-making to capture terrorists, take out terrorists, bring troops home, end kill. I mean, man, heavy. In your last couple minutes here, with the time that you've had to reflect, give me your biggest regret of your time working in the Trump admin, and then let's end on the biggest victory that you had, and then we'll wrap from there.
Well, if I can just take a moment to thank you for your kind words. It's really, this is fun, and I'm happy to come back if I can self-invite myself. But,
yes, of course, buddy.
Very, very generous with your words, and they mean a lot to me. In terms of my biggest regret, or Austin Tice, I didn't bring him home. So that one is hard. It's very hard when you can't return a loved one to their family. And we returned 53 under Trump, but he's the longest one out there after Bob Levinson. And, that just sucked. And I even went to Syria to try to get him. I think probably my biggest victory that I was a part of with President Trump was the al-Baghdadi raid. I was at the White House all day with him, and I was in the sit room with him for the raid and afterwards. And that was probably the greatest national security day that I was personally involved with in a career, which would be capstoned a few months after the raid, I would receive a photograph from the Situation Room. And it was just me and President Trump. And it was the only solo shot of the evening. And on it, it said in his characteristic fashion, "Great job, Kash, President Donald J. Trump." And it's pretty awesome. I got to get that thing framed, but that's probably
It's not framed yet.
I know. I think I got to do stuff, but I think those are probably the two. Yeah,
That's awesome, man. And really, for somebody who's put in the time and energy you had into terrorism and counterterrorism work, to be there with the president on such a momentous day of taking care of like a high value target that had been on the list for a long time. Bad man. That must really have been an exciting moment. And guys, again, just take a look. Kash and I are about the same age. Kash is out there making history, literally. Okay, being involved in history. And I bring this up to say it because history is made by people, by men, women, just individuals doing things. It is insufficient to just say, oh, things will get taken care of. Oh, history has a way of working these things out. Sure, it does in the long term, but in the day to day, it takes people taking action and doing things. And Kash, you've done a lot of things to help all of us, and I'm very grateful, and I really appreciate it. Thank you very much for your time. Thanks for coming on the show and talking to us and getting some of these key facts out there for everyone to hear. Where can people find you if you want to be found? Do you have anything that you're promoting? Do you want to be reached? What are you doing?
No. I appreciate that. Look, where can I be found? On your show.
All right.
I'll come back.
Do it.
I don't have a social media or anything like that. If I'm doing selfless promotions, if you haven't seen The Plot Against the President or read the book by Lee Smith, you need to, because it sums up what happened in this country, and every single shred of that documentary and book has been proven true over the years. And if you're great patriots like Jack and others who are listening, have a look.
Definitely. Highly recommended. Plot Against the President. I've had Amanda Milius on a couple of times, the producer and director. She did a tremendous job. I mean, first class, 5-star, A+ professional production. The information is incredible. The pacing, everything. A+. No wonder it's one of the top selling documentaries on Amazon, I believe, of the year. People want to know the truth. So Kash, thank you very much. Everybody else, hit subscribe on the channel, share this show. Everyone tells me that I am tragically undersubscribed, so please help me out with that. Send this out to your friends, share it, hit like, smash all the buttons you're supposed to. Follow me on Twitter at Jack Murphy Live. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening to this. I really appreciate everything, everybody. And until the next time, we are out.